It was June 10th, 1990, a typical British summer morning. British Airways Flight 5390 sat ready on the tarmac at Birmingham Airport. Its destination, Malaga, Spain, sunshine holiday. Passengers boarded, full of excitement. Families, couples, friends. They settled into their seats, stowing bags, buckling belts. The cabin hummed with anticipation. Just another flight, or so it seemed. Little did they know, this journey would become a legend, a terrifying testament to survival. The flight crew prepared for departure. Captain Timothy Lancaster, a seasoned pilot, 42 years old, thousands of flight hours under his belt. Beside him, First Officer Alistair Atchison, younger but highly skilled, calm and collected. They ran through the pre-flight checklist, every system checked, every dial green. The BAC 111 aircraft was ready. The cabin crew, led by flight purser John Heward, ensured passengers were comfortable, ready for an uneventful trip south. The engine spooled up, a familiar roar. The aircraft taxied to the runway, permission for takeoff granted, engines at full power. The plane surged forward, faster and faster, then rotation, liftoff into the morning sky, a smooth, powerful ascent. Below, Birmingham shrank away. The patchwork fields of England unfolded. Passengers relaxed, some read, others gazed out the windows. The cabin crew began their service. Drinks and snacks, the familiar clink of trolley wheels, a sense of peace up here above the clouds. But the sky can be a treacherous place. Unforgiving, it holds secrets, it can turn in an instant. This flight, BA 5390, was climbing towards its cruising altitude, towards disaster. No alarms sounded, no warnings flashed, just the steady drone of the engines, the quiet murmur of passengers, the illusion of safety. Shattered in a heartbeat, this routine flight was about to become anything but. It was about to become a fight for life, high above the unsuspecting world. The BAC 111 climbed steadily through the cool morning air, higher and higher. It reached an altitude of 17,300 feet over Didcot, Oxfordshire. Inside the cockpit, everything was normal. Captain Lancaster had unfastened his shoulder harness. First Officer Atchison was monitoring the controls. Then it happened, without any warning. A sudden, violent, deafening bang. A sound like a bomb exploding, the cockpit instantly filled with a swirling white mist. Chaos erupted, sheer unadulterated terror. The left windscreen panel, the one directly in front of Captain Lancaster, it had blown out, ripped from its frame, sucked into the vast emptiness of the sky. Gone. In its place, a gaping, jagged hole. Wind travelling at hundreds of miles per hour screamed into the cockpit. A furious, icy torrent. It was like being hit by a solid wall of air. Papers, flight charts, checklists, anything not tied down became dangerous projectiles, swirling in a maelstrom of debris and freezing fog. The sudden loss of the windscreen caused an explosive decompression, a brutal, shocking force. The pressure difference between the inside and outside of the aircraft was immense. The cockpit door, designed to withstand such forces, was torn from its hinges. It slammed violently against the throttle controls and radio panel, disabling the navigation system. The noise was incredible, a constant deafening roar of wind, silence, then the thunderous scream of the atmosphere rushing in. A true nightmare scenario. For the pilots and crew, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated shock. Disbelief warred with primal fear. This wasn't a simulation, this wasn't a training exercise, this was horrifyingly real. The aircraft was crippled, the captain was in immediate mortal danger. Survival instincts, honed by years of training, kicked in. There was no time for panic, only action, a desperate fight for control, a battle against the elements. A struggle for their very lives had just begun, at over 17,000 feet. Captain Timothy Lancaster. He had just loosened his safety harness, a small action, a routine comfort adjustment. Now it almost cost him his life. The explosive decompression acted like a giant vacuum cleaner. The ferocious outrush of air seized him. It tore him from his seat with incredible, irresistible force. He was sucked headfirst out through the shattered windscreen frame, into the freezing, rarefied air, a horrifying, unbelievable sight for anyone who witnessed it. His upper body was entirely outside the aircraft, bent grotesquely backwards over the fuselage. His face slammed hard against the cold metal skin of the plane. The wind, a brutal, relentless assault. He was exposed to air temperatures far below freezing and wind speeds approaching 500 miles per hour. A human body cannot withstand such an onslaught. He was being battered, torn, frozen, his life hanging by the thinnest, most fragile of threads, at the mercy of the rampaging elements. Miraculously, his feet snagged on the flight controls, on the control column. This accidental entanglement was the only thing preventing him from being completely ejected, from being lost to the vast, indifferent sky. His legs were pinned inside, kicking, thrashing, but holding. He was effectively a human plug, partially sealing the hole, his body taking the full force of the wind, unconscious, or perhaps worse. No one inside knew his true state. The scene in the cockpit was one of unimaginable horror. The captain, gone from his seat, his legs the only visible part of him, flailing, the wind roaring, debris flying, the co-pilot fighting to control a bucking, screaming aircraft. It was a moment of sheer terror, a captain's worst nightmare, to be ripped from command, to be at the mercy of such violent, unforgiving forces. This was a battle for survival against odds that seemed impossibly stacked. Flight attendant Nigel Ogden, he was on the flight deck, entering the cockpit just as disaster struck. He saw it all, the window vanish, the captain disappear. Pure raw instinct took over, no time to think, only to react. He lunged forward, into the chaos, into the howling wind. He grabbed Captain Lancaster's legs just above the ankles, a desperate, powerful grip. He wrapped his arms around them, holding on for dear life, his captain's life. Ogden's grip was tenacious, the only anchor, the only thing keeping Captain Lancaster tethered to the aircraft. The force of the wind was immense, trying to tear the captain away, pulling with unimaginable strength. Ogden felt his own strength ebbing. His arms burning, the freezing wind bit into his exposed skin. Frostbite was already setting in on his face and arms, but he held on. He would not let go. He was a lifeline, a human shield against the abyss. John Heward, the flight purser, saw Ogden struggling. He rushed into the cockpit. To help, he quickly strapped himself into the captain's vacated jump seat for leverage, for stability. He reached forward and grabbed Lancaster's belt, reinforcing Ogden's hold. Together, they formed a human chain, a desperate tug of war against the awesome, brutal power of nature. Two men fighting the fury of the sky, their muscles screaming in protest, their resolve unbroken. Soon, two more flight attendants, Susan Price and an unnamed colleague, joined the heroic effort. They managed to relieve the exhausted Nigel Ogden, taking turns to hold on to their captain. They held his ankles, they wrapped a seatbelt around him for extra security, but they couldn't pull him back in. The force was too great. They could only hold on and pray, refusing to surrender him to the storm. Their courage, their teamwork. It was extraordinary. True heroes forged in a moment of crisis. Section 5, against the elements, battered by the wind. Captain Lancaster hung outside that aircraft for 20 agonizing, terrifying minutes, an eternity. The wind speed he endured was over 300 miles per hour, sometimes reaching close to 400 miles per hour during the initial dive. The temperature outside the cockpit was a brutal minus 17 degrees Celsius, 48 degrees Fahrenheit below freezing. Conditions that no human being is meant to survive, exposed, unprotected. He was facing the full, raw fury of the upper atmosphere. His body was thrashed relentlessly against the top of the aircraft like a ragdoll caught in a hurricane. His head, his arms, his torso slammed repeatedly against the cold, hard fuselage. The crew inside watched in horror through the hole where the window used to be. They could see him, his face turning blue from the lack of oxygen and extreme cold. His eyes wide open, staring blankly, unseeing. They believed he was dead. How could anyone survive that? Yet they held on. They refused to let him go. Even if they believed him to be lost, they would not allow his body to fall. It was a testament to their professionalism, to their humanity, to their unwavering spirit. They battled exhaustion. They battled the biting cold that seeped into their own bones. They battled the fear. For their captain, for themselves, for everyone on board that stricken jet, their grip was a bond of courage. The wind screamed, a constant, deafening, piercing roar. It filled the cockpit, it filled their ears, it seemed to fill the world. Inside the aircraft, it was a scene of controlled chaos, frantic efforts, desperate hopes. But outside, for Captain Lancaster, if he was conscious for any of it, it was a silent, brutal, solitary battle. An unimaginable ordeal, pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. This was survival at its most raw, its most extreme. Section 6. A co-pilot's courage. Alistair Acheson takes control. First Officer Alistair Acheson. Suddenly he was alone at the controls, the captain gone, the aircraft plunging, the wind blasting through the cockpit like an Arctic hurricane. He was fighting for control. The autopilot had disengaged violently when the window blew. The plane was descending rapidly. Out of control, he had to act. Fast. The lives of 81 passengers and 4 other crew members depended on him. His training kicked in. Pure focus. He couldn't hear air traffic control. The noise of the wind was overwhelming, deafening, drowning out all other sounds. He was cut off, isolated in his struggle. He had to rely on his skills, his experience, his sheer nerve. He grabbed the control column, fighting against the pressure of Lancaster's body, which was pushing it forward, causing the dive. He had to pull back with all his strength to level the plane, to regain some semblance of command. Acheson initiated an emergency descent. He needed to get the aircraft to a lower altitude, quickly, where the air was thicker, warmer, where the pressure differential would be less severe. This would also reduce the speed and hopefully reduce the horrific pressure on Captain Lancaster and on the brave crew members who were still holding on to him. Every second was critical, a race against time, a race against the failing strength of his colleagues. He managed to re-engage the autopilot, a crucial move, but it was a struggle. Lancaster's body was still slumped over part of the controls, obstructing his view, making every action a challenge. Acheson had to fly the plane, partially blind, entirely by feel and instruments he could glimpse. He had to manage engine power, maintain stability, and begin the process of finding somewhere, anywhere, to land this crippled bird. His courage, his professionalism, it was simply astounding. Section 7, the descent into Southampton, a race against time. Alastair Acheson knew he had to land. Immediately, this was not a situation they could endure for long. He took a breath, focused. He needed to declare an emergency. He managed to get a signal out, squawking 7700 on the transponder, the universal code for an aircraft in distress. He made a mayday call. Though he couldn't hear any response, he hoped someone, somewhere, had heard him. He decided to divert to Southampton Airport. It was the closest suitable runway. The descent was perilous, fraught with danger. Captain Lancaster's body remained partially outside, a constant, horrifying reminder of the crisis. His presence on the controls made precise maneuvers incredibly difficult. Acheson was flying on a knife edge, relying on his training, his instincts, his sheer unyielding determination to save his aircraft, to save his passengers, to save his crew. He was their only hope. The weight of the world on his young shoulders. On the ground, air traffic controllers had picked up the emergency signal. They scrambled into action, clearing airspace, alerting emergency services, fire crews, ambulances, police. They were all put on high alert. Converging on Southampton Airport, they prepared for the worst possible outcome, a crash landing, mass casualties, but they also hoped for a miracle. They guided Acheson as best they could, talking him down, offering support into the roaring void. Every minute of that descent felt like an hour. For the terrified passengers in the cabin, for the heroic crew members holding their captain, for Alastair Acheson wrestling with the controls. He guided the battered BAC 111 down through the layers of cloud towards the distant beckoning runway. The aircraft was damaged. His captain was grievously injured. The odds were stacked against them, but he would not give up. He would bring them home, or die trying. Section 8 miracle on the tarmac, survival against all odds. The crippled aircraft approached Southampton Airport. Lower and lower. First Officer Acheson fought turbulence. He fought the awkward controls. He lined up with the runway. This was it. The final critical moments. He brought the plane down gently, skillfully. The wheels touched the tarmac. A bumpy landing, but a safe one against all conceivable odds. Alastair Acheson had done it. He had landed Flight 5390. He had saved everyone on board. An incredible feat of airmanship. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft. As soon as it rolled to a stop, they raced towards the cockpit, prepared for a devastating scene. Instead, they witnessed something unbelievable. The captain, Timothy Lancaster, still partially outside the shattered windscreen, his body limp, but he was there. And then, a flicker of movement. He was alive. He had survived the unsurvivable. 20 minutes in the freezing, hurricane-force winds. It was nothing short of a miracle. Pure, unadulterated. Captain Lancaster was carefully, gently pulled back into the cockpit by the relieved and exhausted emergency personnel. He was rushed to hospital. He was suffering from severe frostbite, particularly to his hands and face, extensive bruising all over his upper body, a fractured right arm, wrist and thumb, and profound shock, but incredibly, miraculously, he had no life-threatening internal injuries. He had cheated death in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. His resilience was astonishing. Nigel Ogden, the flight attendant who first grabbed Lancaster, he was also taken to hospital. He had suffered frostbite to his face, a dislocated shoulder from the strain of holding on, cuts and bruises, but he had done it. He had held on. He, along with John Hewitt and the other crew members, had saved their captain's life. Their bravery, their quick thinking, their refusal to give up. These were acts of pure, selfless courage. Heroes, every single one of them. Section 9. Lessons from the Edge investigation and safer skies. The aftermath of Flight 5390 was immediate. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, of the UK launched a full, thorough inquiry. The world watched. How could something like this happen? A windscreen simply blowing out of a commercial airliner at altitude. It was almost unthinkable. Investigators descended on Southampton. They meticulously examined the aircraft. They interviewed the crew, the passengers, everyone involved. They needed answers to prevent it from ever happening again. The findings of the investigation were deeply disturbing and shockingly simple. The windscreen panel that failed. It had been replaced just 27 hours before the fateful flight. during routine maintenance. However, the investigation revealed a critical error. Of the 90 securing bolts that held the windscreen in place, 84 of them were the wrong size. They were 0.026 inches, 0.66 millimeters too small in diameter. The remaining 6 bolts were the correct diameter, but they were too short. This maintenance error, this terrible, catastrophic oversight, it was the root cause of the disaster. As the aircraft climbed, the pressure difference between the cabin and the outside air increased. The undersized bolts, they simply could not withstand the immense forces. They failed, one by one, until the windscreen panel gave way completely, exploding outwards. It was a chain of human errors, a lapse in procedure, with almost fatal consequences, a stark reminder of the importance of precision. The incident on Flight 5390 led to significant changes. Stricter safety regulations were implemented across the aviation industry for aircraft maintenance procedures, particularly concerning the installation of windscreens and other critical components. Quality control measures were enhanced, engineering standards were reviewed. The ordeal of Captain Lancaster and his crew, it was a terrifying, near-fatal event, but it ultimately made flying safer for millions of people around the world. A hard, brutal lesson learned from the very edge of disaster.